We had decided, as you know, Herr Sesemann, to have a companion for Clara in the house. And as I knew very well how particular you were to have good and noble friends for your daughter, I fixed my mind on a young Swiss girl, expecting to see such a person appear as I had often read about, one who, sprung up in the pure mountain air, so to speak, goes through life without touching the earth. I think, remarked Herr Sesemann, that Swiss children touch the earth if they move along, otherwise they would have wings instead of feet. Ah, Herr Sesemann, you know what I mean, continued the Fraulein. I mean one of those well-known forms living in the pure mountain regions who pass by us like an ideal breath. But what would my Clara do with an ideal breath, Fraulein Rottenmeier? No, Herr Sesemann, I'm not joking. The matter is more serious to me than you think. I have been frightfully, really, quite frightfully deceived. But how so frightfully? The child doesn't seem to me to be so very frightful, remarked Herr Sesemann calmly. You should know just one thing, Herr Sesemann, only one. What sort of people and animals this creature has filled your house with in your absence. The Herr Kandidat can tell you about that. With animals? What am I to understand by that, Fräulein Rottenmeier? It is not to be understood. This creature's whole conduct is past understanding, except from one point of view, that she has attacks of being out of her mind. Out of her mind. Up to this time, Herr Sesemann had not taken the matter seriously, but out of her mind. This might result seriously for his daughter. Herr Sesemann looked at Fraulein Rottenmeier very closely, as if he wished first to assure himself that she herself was not troubled in that way. Just at that moment the door opened and the Herr Kandidat was ushered in. Ah, here comes our Herr Kandidat, who will give us an explanation, exclaimed Herr Sesemann to him. Come and sit down by me, and he held out his hand to him. The Herr Kandidat will drink a cup of black coffee with me, Fraulein Rottenmeier. Sit down, don't be formal. Now tell me, my dear sir, what is the matter with the child who is coming to my house to be a companion for my daughter, and whom you are teaching? What is the story about her bringing animals into the house, and what is the matter with her mind? The Herr Kandidat had first to express his pleasure at Herr Sesemann's safe return and bid him welcome home, but Herr Sesemann urged him to give his opinion about the matter in question. So the Herr Kandidat began. If I were to speak my mind about the character of this little girl, I should first of all speak especially of the fact that if, on the one hand, she shows a lack of development which through a more or less neglected education, or, to express it better, caused by a somewhat tardy instruction, on the contrary, her qualities unquestionably show the effect of living a long while in the Alps, which, if it doesn't exceed a certain length of time, without doubt, has its good side. My dear Herr Kandidat, interrupted Herr Sesemann, you are really giving yourself too much trouble. Tell me, has the child alarmed you by bringing in animals, and what do you think of her society for my little daughter? I don't wish in any way to offend the young girl, the Herr Kandidat began again. But if she, on the one hand, shows a certain kind of social inexperience due to the more or less wild life in which she moved up to the time of her coming to Frankfurt, to which coming, pray excuse me, Herr Kandidat, don't trouble yourself. I must hasten to look after my daughter. Whereupon Herr Sesemann hurried out of the room and did not return. He went into the library and sat down beside his little daughter. Heidi rose from her seat. Herr Sesemann turned toward the child, saying, Look here, little girl. Wait a minute. Bring me, Herr Sesemann did not exactly know what he wanted, but he wished to send Heidi away for a little while. Bring me, a glass of water. Fresh water? Asked Heidi. Yes, indeed, quite fresh, answered Herr Sesemann. Heidi disappeared. Now, my dear little Clara, said her papa, while he drew near to his daughter and took her hand in his, tell me clearly and distinctly what sort of animals your companion brought into the house, and why Fraulein Rottenmeier should think that she is sometimes not quite right in her head. Can you tell me that? Clara was able to do so, for the worthy lady, in her horror, had spoken to her also about Heidi's puzzling words, the meaning of which were clear to Clara. She first told her father about the turtle and the kittens, and then explained to him Heidi's remark, which had so shocked Fraulein Rottenmeier. Herr Sesemann burst into a hearty laugh. So, you don't care to have me send the child home, Clarikin? You're not tired of her? Asked the father. No, no, Papa, don't do that, begged Clara. Since Heidi's been here, something always happens every day, and the time goes so quickly, not at all as it did before she came, when nothing ever happened. Heidi tells me so many things. Very good. Very good, Clarikin. And here comes your little friend back again. Have you brought cool, fresh water? Asked Herr Sesemann as Heidi offered him a glass of water. Yes, fresh from the well, replied Heidi. Did you run to the well yourself, Heidi? Asked Clara. Yes, indeed. It's perfectly fresh. But I had to go a long way, for there were so many people at the first well. So I went through the whole street, but there was just as many people at the second well. Then I went to another street, and there I got the water. And the gentleman with the white hair sends his regards to Herr Sesemann. So, your expedition was very successful, said Herr Sesemann, laughing. And who was the gentleman? He was passing by the well and then stood still and said, As you have a glass, you might give me a drink. To whom are you going to take the water? And I said, To Herr Sesemann. Then he laughed very loud and told me to give you his regards, and also said, Herr Sesemann ought to enjoy it. Who could it have been? How did the gentleman look? Asked Herr Sesemann. He laughed pleasantly, and had a big gold chain and a gold thing with a large red stone hanging from it, and there was a horse's head on his cane. Ah, that's the doctor. That's my old doctor, said Clara and her father at the same time, and Herr Sesemann laughed again to himself at the thought of his friend and how he would regard this new way of having his supply of water brought to him. That same evening, while Herr Sesemann and Fraulein Rottenmeier were sitting alone in the dining room and talking over all sorts of household matters, he told her that his daughter's companion was to remain in the house. He thought that the child was in a normal condition, and his daughter found her society very pleasant and more enjoyable than any other. I wish, therefore, he added very positively, to have this child always treated kindly, and that her peculiarities shall not be considered as sins. If you should not be able to deal with a child alone, you have the prospect of valuable assistance, for my mother is coming very soon to my house to make a long visit, and she manages everyone, no matter how peculiar he may be. You are well aware of that, Fraulein Rottenmeier? Yes, indeed, I know that, Herr Sesemann, replied the lady, but not with an expression of relief at the assured prospect of help. Herr Sesemann had only a short time to remain at home now, for after 2 weeks business called him back to Paris, and as his little daughter would not consent to his going away so soon, he consoled her with the promise of a visit from her grandmamma, who might be expected in a few days. Herr Sesemann had hardly left home when a letter came announcing that Frau Sesemann had started from Holstein, where she lived in an old estate. She would arrive at a certain hour on the following day, and the carriage was to be sent to the railway station for her. Clara was greatly delighted by the news, and told Heidi that evening so much about her grandmamma that Heidi, too, began to talk about the grandmamma, and Fraulein Rottenmeier looked at her disapprovingly. But the child did not think this anything strange, as she felt continually under her disapproval. When she started later to go back to her room, Fraulein Rottenmeier called her first to hers, and explained then and there that she must never use the name grandmamma, but she must address her as gracious lady. Do you understand this? Asked the lady as Heidi looked at her somewhat doubtfully, but gave her such a forbidding look in return that Heidi asked no more explanation, although she did not understand the title. On the following evening there were great expectations and lively preparations in the Sesemann house, and it was plain to be seen that the expected lady was of great importance there, and that everyone felt a deep respect for her. Tinette had put on a brand-new white cap on her head, and Sebastian had collected a great number of footstools so that the lady might find one under her feet whenever she might sit down. Fräulein Rottenmeier, very erect, went through the rooms inspecting everything, as if to show that even though a second ruling power was near at hand, her own, for all that, had not come to an end. The carriage rolled up to the door, and Sebastian and Tinetti rushed down the stairs. Fräulein Rottenmeier, in a dignified way, followed slowly after, for she knew that she had to appear to welcome Frau Sesemann. Heidi had been told to go to her room and to wait there until she was called, for the grandmamma would first go to see Clara and would wish to see her alone. Heidi sat down in the corner and repeated what she was to say to Frau Sesemann. She did not have long to wait before Tinetti thrust her head a little way in the door and said sharply, as usual, "Go to the library." Heidi had not dared to ask Fräulein Rottenmeier for an explanation about the manner of addressing the grandmamma, but she thought the lady must have made a mistake, for until now she had always heard a person called Frau or Herr, with a name following, so she settled the matter thus in her own mind. As she opened the door into the library, the grandmamma called out to her in a friendly voice, "Ah, here is the child. Come here to me and let me look at you." Heidi went to her, and in her clear voice said distinctly, "How do you do, Lady Gracious?" "And why not?" said the grandmamma, laughing. "Is that what you say at home? Do you hear that in the Alps?" "No, no one among us has that name," answered Heidi earnestly. "Neither has anyone here," said the grandmamma, again laughing and patting Heidi affectionately on the cheek. "It's no matter. In the nursery I am grandmamma, and you shall call me so. You can remember that, can't you?" "Yes, I can," said Heidi confidently. "I always called you so before." "Well, you understand now," said the grandmamma, nodding her head quite merrily. Then she took a good look at Heidi, nodding her head again from time to time. And Heidi looked very earnestly into her eyes, for they had such an expression of kindness that they made her feel quite at ease, so that she could not look away. She had such beautiful white hair, and round her head a lovely lace frill, and 2 broad strings fluttered from her cap, and moved continually as if a light breeze hovered round the grandmamma. And this seemed to Heidi very peculiar. "And what is your name, child?" then asked the grandmamma. "My name is just Heidi, but if I must be called Adelheid, I'll answer to that." Heidi hesitated, for she felt a little guilty, since she had still made no reply if Fräulein Rottenmeier called unexpectedly Adelheid, for it did not really seem to her that this was her name, and Fräulein Rottenmeier was just coming into the room. "Frau Sesemann will doubtless admit," broke in Fräulein Rottenmeier, "that I had to choose a name which could be pronounced without so much difficulty for the sake of the servants." "My dear Rottenmeier," replied Frau Sesemann, "if a person is named Heidi, and she is accustomed to the name, I call her so, and let it remain so." Fräulein Rottenmeier was very much troubled because the old lady continually addressed her by her last name alone. But there was nothing to do about it. The grandmamma always had her own way, and there was no help for it. Besides, her 5 senses were keen and sound, and she always knew what was going on in the house. On the day after her arrival, when Clara lay down at the usual time after dinner, the grandmamma took a seat in an easy-chair by her side, and closed her eyes for a few moments, and then she jumped up, for she was immediately awake again, and went out into the dining-room. There was no one there. "She is asleep," she said to herself, then went to Fräulein Rottenmeier's room and knocked loudly on the door. After some time the Fraulein appeared, and started back somewhat alarmed by the unexpected visit. "Where does the child stay at this time, and what does she do? I should like to know about it," said Frau Sesemann. "She sits in her room, where she might busy herself with something useful if she had the slightest desire to do anything. But Frau Sesemann ought to know what strange things this creature often plans and really carries into effect, things at which I could hardly speak about in polite society." "Well, I should do the same if I had to sit there alone as this child does, I assure you. and you would see how you would speak of my nonsense in polite society. Now bring the child out and fetch her to my room. I want to give her some pretty books I've brought with me." "That is just the trouble. It is indeed," exclaimed Fraulein Rothenmeier, wringing her hands. "What can the child do with books? In all this time she's not even learned her ABCs. It's really impossible to get a single idea into this creature's head. The Herr Kandidat can tell you about that. If this excellent man didn't possess the patience of an angel from heaven, he would long ago have given up trying to teach her." "This is very strange. She doesn't look like a child who cannot learn the alphabet," said Frau Sesemann. "Now bring her to me. She can first look at the pictures in the books." Fraulein Rothenmeier was anxious to make further remarks, but Frau Sesemann had already turned around and was hurrying back to her room. She was very much surprised to hear of Heidi's stupidity and thought she would make an investigation, but not with Herr Kandidat. Though she really valued him on account of his good character, she always spoke to him in a particularly friendly way whenever she met him, but then hurried away in order not to be drawn into conversation with him, for his manner of expressing himself was rather annoying to her. Heidi came into Grandmamma's room and opened her eyes wide when she saw the gay pictures in the large books which the lady had brought with her. Suddenly Heidi screamed aloud when the grandmamma turned a new leaf, and she looked at the figures with gleaming eyes. Then all at once bright tears rushed to them, and she began to sob as if her heart would break. The grandmamma examined the picture. It was a lovely green pasture, where all sorts of animals were feeding and nibbling the green shrubs. In the middle stood the shepherd, leaning on a long staff and gazing at the happy creatures. It seemed as if there were a golden light over us all, for the sun was just going down beyond the horizon. The grandmamma took Heidi by the hand. "Come, come, child," she said in a friendly way. "Don't cry. Don't cry. The picture made you remember something. But see, there's a lovely story about it, which I will tell you this evening. And there are many, many more beautiful stories in the book, which can be read and repeated. Come, we must have a little talk together. Dry your tears and stand right here in front of me, so that I can look straight at you. There, that's right. Now we're happy again." But it was still some time before Heidi could stop sobbing. The grandmamma gave her a good while to recover, merely saying encouragingly now and then, "There, that's good. Now we can be happy again together." When she finally saw that the child was quieted, she said, "Now, you must tell me something, my child. How do you get along in the study hours with Herr Kandidat? Are you studying well, and have you learned something?" "Oh, no," answered Heidi, sighing. "But I knew that it couldn't be learned." "What could not be learned, Heidi? What do you mean?" "People can't learn to read. It's too hard." "What an idea! And where did you hear this news?" "Well, Peter told me so. He knows about it. He has to keep trying, but he can never learn. It's too hard." "Well, Peter is a strange fellow. But see here, Heidi, you must not always take for granted what Peter tells you. You must try for yourself. Surely you have not listened with all your mind to Herr Kandidat and looked at the letters." "It's no use," answered Heidi, with a tone of entirely giving in to what could not be helped. "Heidi," said Grandmamma, "now I am going to tell you something. You have not learned to read yet because you believe Peter. But now you must believe me. And I tell you really and truly that you can learn to read in a short time, like a great many children, who are like you and not like Peter. Now you must know what will happen when you read. You have seen the shepherd in the beautiful green pasture. As soon as you can read, you shall have the book for your own, so that you can learn his whole story, just as if somebody told it to you. All that he is doing with his sheep and goats, and all the remarkable things that happened to him. You would like to know this, wouldn't you, Heidi?" Heidi had listened with most eager attention, and now she said with beaming eyes and drawing a deep breath, "Oh, if I could only read now, it will come. and it won't take long. That I can see already, Heidi. And now we must look after Clara. Come, we will take the lovely books with us." And the grandmamma took Heidi by the hand and went in with her into the library. Since the day when Heidi had wanted to go home and Fraulein Rottenmeier had scolded her on the steps and told her how naughty and ungrateful she had shown herself by wishing to run away, and that it would be a good thing if Herr Sesemann never knew about it, a change had taken place in the child. She had the idea that she could not go home if she wished, as her aunt had told her, but that she must stay in Frankfurt for a long, long time, perhaps forever. She had also understood that Herr Sesemann, when he came home, would think her very ungrateful, and she imagined that Clara and her grandmamma would think so too. So Heidi dared tell no one that she wanted to go home, for she did not wish to cause the grandmamma to be cross like Fraulein Rottenmeier. But in her heart the burden grew heavier and heavier. She could no longer eat. Every day she grew a little paler. At night she often lay awake for a long, long time, for as soon as she was alone and all was still around her, everything came so lifelike before her eyes. The arm, and the sunshine on it, and the flowers. And when finally she fell asleep, she would see in her dreams the red-pointed cliffs of Falkness and the fiery snowfield of Skaplanka. And in the morning she would awake and, full of joy, be ready to run out of the hut, and suddenly she was in her big bed in Frankfurt, so far, far away, and could not go home, and she'd bury her head in her pillow and weep. Heidi's unhappiness did not escape the grandmamma's notice. She let some days pass by to see if there would be any change in her, if her downheartedness would pass away. But as Heidi remained the same, and the grandmamma often could see early in the morning that she'd been crying, she called the child into her room one day and said with great kindness, "Now tell me, Heidi, what is the matter? Is something grieving you?" But Heidi would not seem ungrateful to the kind grandmamma, for fear she might no longer be so friendly toward her, so she said sadly, "I cannot tell you." "No? Can you not tell Clara?" asked the grandmamma. "Oh, no." "No, I can't tell anybody," said Heidi decidedly, and looked so unhappy that the grandmamma pitied her. "Come, my child," she said, "I want to tell you something. When you have a sorrow that you cannot speak to anybody about, you can tell the dear God in heaven and ask Him to help you, for He can take away every sorrow that troubles you. You understand that, don't you? You pray every night to the dear God in heaven and thank Him for every good thing, don't you? And ask Him to keep you from all harm?" "Oh, no, I never do that," answered the child. "Have you never prayed then, Heidi? Do you not know what it is?" "Oh, I used to pray with the first grandmother, but it's so long ago that I've forgotten about it." "You see, Heidi, the reason you are so sad is because you know no one that can help you. Just think what a good thing it is when something troubles and distresses you in your heart. Then you can go any moment to the dear Lord and tell Him everything and ask Him to help you, when no one else can help you. And He can always help you and make you happy again." A glad light came into Heidi's eyes. "Can I tell Him everything?" "Everything?" "Everything, Heidi, everything." The child drew her hand out of Grandmamma's and said quickly, "May I go?" "Certainly." "Certainly," was the reply, and Heidi ran away to her own room, where she sat down on a stool, and folding her hands told the dear Lord everything that was in her heart, everything that made her sad, and asked Him urgently and sincerely to help her, and to let her go home to her grandfather. A little more than a week had passed since this day when Herr Kandidat asked to see Frau Sesemann, as he wished to talk with her about an important matter. He was called to her room. Frau Sesemann politely offered him her hand. "My dear Herr Kandidat, I am glad to see you. Sit down here by me." And she pushed a chair toward him. "There. Now, tell me what brings you here. Nothing unpleasant, no complaint." "On the contrary, gracious madam," began Herr Kandidat, "something has happened which I no longer expected, and anyone who could have glanced at what went before, after thinking it all over, would have decided that what has actually happened and taken place in the most wonderful ways, quite impossible, as if in opposition to all consistent to the—" "Has the child Heidi possibly learned to read?" Herr Kandidat broke in Frau Sesselmann.